Ahoy! How is New World Aeternum's launch going? That's what we're going to look into today. We'll look into some of the issues that there are currently in the game. We're looking at the player count and what we can find out about general player numbers. We're looking at the event. We're looking at the raid. Much of this is not going quite as I expected it to go, but also not quite as AGS probably expected it to go, based on some of the signs that we have. So let's begin with the launch itself. I think it was relatively bug-free compared to what we're used to, and that is especially surprising considering not everything had been tested beforehand. That doesn't mean that there were no bugs. If you look at this list right here, this is the list of bugs from launch, and as you can see, the list is pretty long. We're not going to go through all of that, but what I can say about many of these bugs is that they're very minor and very niche. But of course, there were also some more game-breaking bugs. Xbox in particular seemed to have some issues early on, even trying to launch the game. That was fixed relatively quickly. There's a bug with upgrading artifacts to gear score 725, which is now disabled for a bit, and that's obviously a bigger problem when it comes to late game progression, preparing for the raid and so on, but people who have crafted anything of that sort will get their materials refunded in the coming days, so at least you're not losing anything. There were some quest progression issues that were fixed, and the corruption barbs for as black as sackcloth has been increased, something that should have happened years ago, but hey, at least it finally happened. And then Xbox had another issue with global chat and the friend list. And they also introduced a very interesting change at the same time, which didn't work initially, but apparently now it's working. Players will now earn weapon XP for both equipped weapons, including their sheathed weapon, even if they didn't use that in combat, but you get less on your offhand than your main hand. Just a nice quality of life improvement and a nice way to also level a weapon without having to use it at all. If you just have a weapon, mastery 20 weapon, and you just put on a random offhand that you wanted to level, you don't need to even touch it. And then there are some other quest progression issues that they fixed just today. So all in all, by New World standards, a relatively smooth run. What does the player count say about that? On PC, on Steam specifically, we have a peak here of 53,000 players. Keep in mind, this isn't the weekend peak yet, so while it's going down right now, we may see more at the weekend, possibly, who knows. We will find out, but that's a pretty decent number. If we look at the all-time numbers, then for New World, or rather for the Elysian Wilds, we had a 77,000 peak, and keep in mind this was focused on PC players. This was a lot of late-game content for PC players specifically, well, not a lot of it, but much more than we're getting here. So this was a decent point, and then this was Brimstone Sand. That was like the biggest return point with 137,000 players. This of course is all dwarfed by the launch numbers of nearly 1 million players, but this is where we should be looking at. So roughly 140,000 players at Brimstone launch, because we are not seeing how many players we are getting on other platforms, and that's something we need to factor in. Fortunately, we will have a way to look into that in just a second, so we can actually talk a little bit more about what the real number here is and how it likely compares to Brimstone Sands. What I think is worth noting is that the player count that we're having may not match with what was expected from the devs, or from the publishers rather. If we're looking at AP Southeast, we actually have a region here that has a PlayStation and Xbox server. We don't really know anything about those. But other than that, it already had 2 servers that were pretty much dead. And it got 1 new server. It got Pisces as the new fresh start or standard server. And Pisces is doing well. It has a medium population right now, but around evening it can actually go to a high population. Sometimes it has a queue. So Pisces is relatively full right now. And the other servers are not doing very well. But then you can see this list here of hidden servers that they had ready in case they were needed. And that's a lot of servers. Considering we ended up needing 1 server effectively, I would say that console-only servers were probably not needed in terms of player numbers. I'm assuming they're relatively a low population. It is very interesting how many extra servers they had here. And we can see a similar picture if we go into any other region. So if we go to EU, we see a lot more fresh start worlds here, which currently all are low pop, but that's because of the time of the day. That's because I'm in Australian time zone, so that doesn't really match. But you can see how many extra hidden servers they had here as well. A lot more. So they were ready for a massive amount of players possibly coming in. And I don't think the expectations were quite met here. Of course, a lot of this is just backup for whatever reason, just in case it's needed somehow. And you can see, for example, if we look at US East right now, you can't create a character at certain worlds here because they're too full. So we might see some of them even being rolled out at some point. But yeah, again, very long list here of servers that effectively didn't end up being used. How many of them they were expecting to be used is unclear, but they at least went through the effort of giving every single one of them a name, so they must have cared to some degree that these servers might come into play, must have expected it to some degree. On Twitch, if we're looking at New World Aeternum right now, we have 7k viewers, which is not a lot, but they do go up at certain times of the day. So yesterday evening, for example, I think it was around 23,000, so this number changes a lot. What I think is more interesting with Twitch specifically are these code drops, right? You see this here. We have various known content creators that have code drops through Amazon. And these code drops are extremely weird because it's not a normal drop system where you just sit in the stream for a certain amount of time and then you get the drop, but rather it's actually codes that are being given out. And this is tied to the Trials of Aeternum system. And the Trials of Aeternum system, it was so confusing to me because there's no real explanation in-game about any of it. It's not showing in-game anywhere as far as I'm aware, or at least I couldn't find it. And I was wondering, okay, how do we even see progression? So it's on this website. I will put the link in the description. You can see the progression, and you can see the progression for each team. You can select your team here, and here are the rewards. So there is technically this overview. And at the bottom here, we can see the objectives. And with the objectives, we can also see the progression. And this progression is very important for us because it may be one of the few times where we can actually get a somewhat accurate idea of how many PC versus console players there are. Now this, for example, here is unlock your first mount. This is a level 20 quest that you need to complete. And we can see that the bar is almost filled on PC. If we compare this to Xbox bar is just slightly longer. Not big a difference, but it's slightly longer here. And if you look at PlayStation, even more. Surprisingly, slightly more PlayStation players here than Xbox players apparently. But then again, Xbox also had a bug initially. So, between those bars, we can tell that there are slightly more console players playing on the fresh start servers, on the standard servers, than there are PC players. However, it is worth noting that there are also PC players that stuck to the legacy servers that are focused on the raid, for example. So they are slightly less likely to play on these fresh start servers. So the PC numbers probably also include some more players, if we look at the Steam charts, that have not touched the fresh start. On the other hand, a lot of the PC players tend to level faster because they've done this a few times. So if we look at level 35, you can see the progression for Xbox and for PlayStation is lower compared to PC. And then we have achievements here that I don't even know why they're part of the first week. For example, buy your first house. We can see that PC players for the most part haven't really done that, probably because they realize that it's not really necessary for anything at the moment. It's more of a, you can save up for the long-term cheaper house, or basically the more expensive house and get a bigger discount, or you can buy it right now. And I guess more of the new players will be buying it as soon as they see they can buy a house. And similarly, we have the complete One Regal Expedition. This is our PC bar here. And then we have less on the consoles, which I think is also partially because it's not really getting advertised as a new player that expeditions are a big thing. You're not getting much of a notification for that. And then we have get at least one trade skill to 150, which really, it's a low bar on any of these servers because that wouldn't really be a priority. But again, PlayStation is catching up here. The numbers still looked different yesterday in comparison. So what I'm generally seeing here, though, is that we have a relatively even distribution between all three different platforms if we exclude the legacy PC players, which makes me think that the total number of players that we have is somewhere in the ballpark of 150,000, which again would put it roughly on level with Brimstone Sands, and will also mean that at the same time the New World team has made more of a profit from it because they're selling the full game and not just the expansion price for all consoles. So yeah, technically not a bad outcome for them. I just don't know if they expected this or if they expected more. What I, again, think indicates that they might expect more, along with the amount of servers that they initially put up, is the progression on these achievements. It looks like most servers are far from reaching the required amount. I don't think enough people will buy their first house by the end of the first week to fill this bar. So they may have to readjust their expectations there a little bit, especially when even like reaching level 35 is something that many people won't do that early on, or getting a trade skill to 150. It's also interesting from the perspective of them basically kind of indicating to us that they don't want us to rush things, but a lot of these progression bars here are kind of aiming to rush things. Obviously, level 20, yeah, that's easily done, but level 35, without rushing at all, sure, if you just go down the main story quest, you'll get there, but if you're just kind of exploring the game slowly, doing a bit of main story, bit of everything else, you may not be 35 as a brand new player. You may not be close to buying your first house. You may not be even discovering expeditions in the first week, and you most certainly won't be going to 150 on a trade skill. So kind of odd that these incentives here heavily encourage doing things that somewhat push you to rush the game to a degree. Of course, for an experienced PC player, getting to level 35 is not in any way rushing it. You'll probably end up level 65 if you just do the main story quest a little too long. But for someone who's really just exploring the game for the first time and taking the world in, these bars seem very high. But either way, that's the pathway they have chosen so far. And we'll see how that plays out. We might see some adjustments to that in the following weeks. And then last but not least, we also have the world first clear of the Hive of the Gorgons. I don't know the group that did it, like I don't know any of the players. The person who uploaded this is LXRCH, and here you can see the names of all the players that were involved in it. They did the full raid. I haven't watched all of it because I didn't want to get spoiled myself. I want to find out about some of the mechanics as I go into it. But that was the first clear, and they cleared it within, I think, a couple hours. And then the world's second clear was Mr. Mojito's group, who also cleared the raid within 3 hours. I will say that these are highly prepared raid groups who have practiced raids for a long time. They have done the Sandworm countless times. So considering it took them a while, it may be true that this raid could be harder than Sandworm, or at least around the same level, just based on these being very practiced groups and them not immediately full-on clearing the entire raid. You could think that maybe, hey, it is a bit more difficult. And then some random groups have apparently cleared the first boss, but struggled with the second boss especially. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how progression within the raid is over the coming weeks, how many people end up clearing it, how quickly. Not so much happening on the fresh start servers for a while, but we'll see about that as well. For now, that is the overview that we have. If you're interested in more updates, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And if you want to get more early trading tips, especially for the fresh start servers, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.